Hello, welcome everybody to our online panel discussion on why and how we should protect multilingualism. This event is part of the program of this year's events for UNESCO International Mother Languages Day, based in Manchester, UK. But tonight we're very pleased to hold this as an international panel discussion with an international audience. And this is not a coincidence and it's not random. It's part of our strategic vision to link Manchester with other multilingual cities around the world. This event is hosted by Manchester City of Languages, which is a civic partnership that is open to individuals and organizations and offers an open forum for discussion on multilingualism to identify problems and global solutions. And we are partnering tonight with the Muslim Arts and Culture Festival, who very kindly supported the logistics and the promotion of the event, and with Manchester City of Literature, who in the past few years has been leading in organizing the program for Manchester's International Mother Language Day. Let me start by introducing myself and the distinguished members of our international panel of experts and activists. My name is Yaron Matras. I was Professor of Linguistics at the University of Manchester, where I founded and led the Multilingual Manchester project for many years. And it was in that context that we initiated International Mother Language Day celebrations in Manchester. And in 2017, we had the very first panel discussion for Language Day, and things took off from there. That was February 2017. I'm also co-founder of the Manchester City of Languages Initiative. With us tonight on the panel are Francesca La Morgia, who is co-founder of Mother Tongues Ireland and a linguist based in Dublin. Falce and benvenuta. Daniel Kaufman, who's a linguist and the founder of the Endangered Language Alliance, based in New York. Shalom Aleichem. Kamal Kelzi, who is a student and a Dom language activist and researcher based in Gothenburg. Ahlan sahlan fik, welcome. And Anjum Malik, who is a writer, a lecturer in creative writing, and one of Manchester's multilingual city poets. Khosh amdid, or ahlan sahlan fik. Welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Before we hear from our panelists, I'd just like to say a couple of words about the direction that we had in mind for tonight. We're hearing a lot in the promotion around events of Mother Language Day around the world. We're hearing the word celebration, celebrating languages. What exactly are we celebrating? How do we celebrate? Why is it important to celebrate? We're hearing different things. We're hearing that languages are identity, languages are culture. Some people tell us that languages are good for the economy because they connect with people around the world. Some people tell us that languages are important for soft power, so we can dominate other people without using force. So there's very different views about why languages are good for us. We sometimes get the impression that the word diversity and language diversity has become a bit of a commodity. And one of the things that I'd very much like us to explore tonight is whether there's a difference in nuance or in meaning between linguistic diversity and multilingualism. If we go back in history for just a moment, as many of you will know, UNESCO International Mother Language Day was a Bangladeshi initiative at UNESCO, and in Bangladesh, Mother Language Day had been commemorated for many years, celebrated for many years, and its purpose was to commemorate language activists who lost their lives protesting for their right to use their mother language in Dhaka in the early 1950s. Dhaka at the time was East Pakistan and has since become Bangladesh after independence in the early 1970s. Those activists weren't celebrating. They lost their lives not as part of a celebration. I don't think they lost their lives to strengthen the local economy either. They fought for human rights. They saw mother tongue as a cause of equality, as part of a movement against a form of colonialism. For them, I think mother language was a decolonial enterprise. It was about freedom. So I'd like to reflect on that a little bit tonight and think about, where does that put us today in regard to our commitment to protect multilingualism? And that's where the hows and the whys, or the whys and the hows, come in. So let me pass the word to our panelists and start with you, Francesca. If you can just tell us a little bit about what is Mother Tongues Ireland, how did it come about, what does it do, what does it aim to achieve?
Thanks, Yaron. I suppose, as you said earlier, Mother Tongues is based in Ireland, all over the country. It aims to foster multilingualism. It aims to foster all the citizens' mother tongues, whatever those might be. And of course, we have 3 official languages in Ireland: English, Irish, and Irish Sign Language. But obviously, there's more than 100 languages spoken in our classrooms, in the workplace. So it is truly a small island with a relatively small population, but with a very high number of languages. We work primarily through the arts and through advocacy. So we have a festival that we run every year, which just finished a couple of days ago, hence my face at the moment. And we celebrate this kind of through the arts festival in the period of International Mother Language Day. We also have a year-round family program called Language Explorers, where parents and children together attend multilingual arts workshops. And with our advocacy, we give talks on bilingualism, on raising bilingual children. We run plenty of webinars for parents nowadays, and we have one-to-one consultations. And I suppose the main idea that came from my experience as a linguist has been able to study, research, see what's evolving in the world of academia, but seeing that it didn't quite always feed into practice, whether that was the practice of teachers, whether that was the practice of, also very importantly, parents. So Mother Tongues creates a bridge between the research, between the advocacy, and the people that benefit from this knowledge. I think you're muted, Yaron.
Thanks. I think we had some problems with transmission there, but so for you, Mother Tongues is not just it is an annual celebration, but it's also an all year round activity. And I like very much the word advocacy there and raising awareness. If we can go over to Daniel now from New York, what is the Endangered Language Alliance? It's also an all year round thing. What do you do, and what are you trying to achieve?
Thank you, Yaron. Hi, everybody. Just briefly, the Endangered Language Alliance, it's a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2010 in New York City with the realization that urban immigrants, and especially indigenous urban immigrants, are going to have to play an increasingly larger role in the survival of their languages. It was assumed that when you leave your homeland, for many communities, you're kind of putting your language life and cultural life on hold, and that certain languages don't belong in urban areas. And we've been trying to work for the last last 10 years or so to work with indigenous communities so that they can both develop their own languages for themselves, but also to contribute back to their linguistic communities. So actually similar to the project that was just discussed, we're also trying to bridge sometimes the academic aspect, the linguistic side, with advocacy and art as well. So it's really kind of we're an organization that tries to do a little bit of everything. Most recently, the project that I think has put us on the map is our language map that was developed, when exactly? What year was that? Begin? Over 5 years, and thanks to my co-director Ross Perlin here, who you can see, who really developed it into an electronic resource that showed quite, I think, powerfully to city agencies, among others, the real level of under-recognized language diversity in the city. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks. I'm hearing from both of you that arts is a means to an end in this. It's a means to raise awareness, to change people's lives, to give confidence. Anjum, you have this fascinating title, Multilingual City Poet, and as a linguist, I can't help but looking at the composition of words and tearing it apart, and it has actually a double meaning. So it's a multilingual city and a multilingual poet. So what is the role of the multilingual city poet? What do you do in that role, and what are you trying to achieve?
Hi, Yaron, and hi, everyone from around the world. It's so exciting to see where everybody's from. Yeah, it's, you know, Manchester's got a long history of being the first in doing some incredible things, like the first public parks, the first public libraries, and there's a long list, women's rights, and now they've gone ahead and been the first to have multilingual poets, city poets, which is incredible. So there are three of us, Spanish, Arabic, and Urdu speaking poets. And we are very, very honored and excited to be given this title and this job, because what we do is we get commissioned, we represent our amazing city, and we are commissioned to celebrate big poetry events around the world. So my first commission was for the International Poetry Day, and I wrote a poem about Manchester. So I wrote it in Urdu and in English, which are my languages, two of my languages. I have some more. And then Ali and Yova translated them into Spanish and Arabic. And then each of us has, like, we kind of chose our own events. We're not told what to write about, which is even better. And then so when they write a poem, so I've just translated Yova's Spanish poem into Urdu. So we get to write our poems in both our language and English, and then we get them translated by two other poets. So it's like true multilingualism being celebrated, and like in a way I've never experienced before, but I am so very excited about it. And I mean, does that give you an answer? Because I could go on and on.
Let's leave it there, and we'll come back to you in a moment, and we can you can elaborate.
So, yeah.
Kamal, we've introduced you as a Dom language activist, and I think many people who are attending tonight probably, I assume, don't really know anything or not much about the Dom language. So can you first of all tell us a little bit about what is the Dom language, and how did you get involved in trying to make it better known to the public, and why?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Kamal, and I'm a Dom from Syria living in Sweden. I speak 4 languages. My mother tongue is Dom. I guess many of you never heard about the Dom language before. The language Dom is an Indo-Aryan language spoken by the Doms, an ethnic group that originated in India. According to linguistic evidence, the Doms left India approximately 1,000 years ago with a still unclear reason towards the Middle East. We can also say towards Europe right now. The Doms are estimated to be between 2 and 5 million, with a still unknown number of speakers. However, I became interested in making my language better known to a wider public because once I read that my language is endangered. So I wanted to save it a little bit, and it's a beautiful language. And the second reason is my language is not so popular. So there are very few people who know about it. So I wanted to spread the information to make it better known as many other languages are known. And I want everyone to be proud of their language and their background. And it's just a start in my community.
Thank you. We'll come back again to a few issues there, and you can tell us more. So back to Anjum first, and then we'll come back to you, Kamal. We talk a lot about, we just mentioned the arts and how they are engaged in the service of celebration. But what is actually the multilingual experience? What is it that we are celebrating there? How does it affect, how does your multilingualism affect who you are, you personally and in general people? How does it shape your views? Does it shape the things that you choose to do in life, the encounters that you have?
Oh, definitely. I mean, being multilingual is such an advantage. You don't realize it, you know, when you're born into it, because my parents originate from Pakistan. I was born in the Middle East, and I lived in the Middle East, Pakistan and England before I was 12. I arrived in England speaking those languages fluently, including English. I spoke American English because my father worked for Americans. And so, yeah, it was really, it was amazing because I was speaking all three languages, Arabic, English, and Urdu, right from the beginning. I don't remember how I knew the difference or what, you know, how I knew where to speak what. I definitely had a few problems when I arrived in England and spoke better English than my head teacher. And I was the only Asian kid who could speak fluent English. And I was very clear when I had racism thrown into my face by my head teacher by saying things like, go back to where you come from. I could say in really good English why I wouldn't do that and how he shouldn't do that, say that. So, and my mother, you know, came from what I would call is, she was a language warrior. I have a family of language warriors. My uncle Fitrat, was a big poet in Pakistan. He fought for Urdu to be established with Quaid-e-Azam, the founder of Pakistan. And he was like the original literature development worker in Rawalpindi, which I only discovered when I went back to Pakistan as an adult. And then my mother went in to fight this head teacher who refused to let me study Urdu. And he said, no, we can't do it. So she found an examining board, taught me Urdu, and I passed. You know, I did O levels, A levels, and now, you know, I've gone on to some of my jobs. My first job was as a police officer in Yorkshire. My language, you know, the different languages came in very handy. The police loved it. And I kept, even after I left, they kept calling me in, and I became an advisor for a long, long time. I've helped them around the country where I've lived in different cities. And then, you know, now, of course, I write in Urdu as a creative writer, you know, as a poet, as a script writer. I write dramas, I write poetry, and I'm blessed that I can, because I think the fundamental thing about being multilingual is that we see world in so many different ways and we experience it. And we are very lucky, and there have been studies to show, there was a movement in England when I was young that it was wrong to learn different languages because it would affect your exam results. But it's been proven wrong with scientific studies that being multilingual is incredible. You know, and I've worked with organizations like Avon to promote multilingualism and help children in schools who are like I was to be confident in their languages. So maybe I'm also carrying that torch of a language warrior for my family. I hope I am.
Well, I like very much the language warrior thing, because it destabilizes a little bit the coziness of the celebration, doesn't it? We don't, you know, some places celebrate warriors, but there's sometimes a kind of a bit of a contradiction. So maybe, can I just take you back to one point though? I mean, you said language is an enriching experience. It can be an artistic experience, but you also talked about racism. So multilingualism can bring about suffering. I'm being kind of provocative here just a little bit, but it's an important point. I mean, that's, again, if we go back to the commemoration in Bangladesh, it was about suffering and wanting to exit from the suffering. How does that play a role? How do you think that should play a role when we get together in a city and celebrate languages?
I think it's very common for multilingual school kids, students in schools to experience racism because they are multilingual. I go into schools all the time as a writer now, and a lot of people, young people, will tell me that. But, you know, we have, you know, colonialism, one of their main aims was to wipe out languages around the world. And the Indian subcontinent was one of the few places where we all, with our amazing different languages, held onto our scripts. If you go to Indonesia, where I go a lot, you know, they've lost their scripts. Their language has to be written in Roman letters. And that's a common experience of countries which suffered colonialism. So racism and multilingualism are very linked very strongly. And I think, you know, language is definitely used to oppress. If you wipe out people's languages, you can wipe, I mean, that's wiping them out, really. And that's been a big part of, you know, that's why we have English all over the world. And yeah, definitely. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's something I'm very passionate about.
I think, yeah, thank you very much. You are, and I think these are answers that we're all developing. So, you know, ideas. Let's come back to Kamal. I mean, you were talking, Kamal, about your fear that your language, or you heard that your language was being endangered. You wanted to protect it, you wanted to save it. And Anjum just talked about discrimination and racism. Your people have suffered more discrimination and racism probably than many other people around nations around the world. How does your multilingual experience also bring with it, alongside the enrichment and the connecting to different people, how does it embody or remind you of oppression and hierarchies and marginalization that your people have suffered?
So you mean about the discrimination, right?
Well, I mean, in general, what is your multilingual experience and your people's multilingual experience? How does it affect who the Dom people are? The fact that they have their own language, is there an issue and a memory of being singled out because of a language?
Yeah, so sometimes I can have a problem. For example, while talking with someone, Arab, and when I tell them that I have another language, my mother tongue is Dom, when I tell them, so they just ask like, what is it? And how can you speak so fluent Arabic? Like, how did you learn Arabic? And a lot of questions like just comes. And actually, so in my opinion, it does affect. And as it says, to have another language is to possess a second soul. I heard this quote before. So sometimes I can really behave differently in different languages by changing my voice tone, having different subjects, and using different gestures and proverbs. So, but I think this does not make someone a completely different person, because, for example, I can be more formal in one than the other language. And it's all about, sometimes it depends on how you are, which part of yourself is more comfortable with a specific language. And in my opinion, I think speaking several languages is has a lots of benefits, and also struggles and questions. I think they bring you an understanding of the cultures behind them. And yes, so
well, your people recently, as you alluded to before, have become refugees through the crisis in the civil war in Syria over the past decade. And they're dispersed now in so many different countries. And before that, there were Dom people already dispersed when they first immigrated to the Middle East. So the Dom people have always been dispersed. Do people that you interact with in your community share your views? Do they cherish their language? Or are there people who are either afraid to speak their language, or think they don't need to, or they shouldn't, or they should abandon it? Do you need to convince them of the advantages of multilingualism and convince them to protect their language?
I think because we are like, there is a high number of Doms in Syria, so they are not afraid of talking their language at home or outside also. So that's, but because of we are a majority, we are like in the Middle East, the dorms are, the higher number of the dorms are in Syria. So, but like in Syria, we are just a small minority. So the dorms, they are not afraid to talk and use their language. Like I just met someone he is Dom and he is not talking the Dom language. So other Doms, they just look at him down and why don't you talk Dom? Like it's just talk your language, and they are not afraid of talking their language, and they are just I think, but I just heard it's an endangered language. But in my case in Syria, it's still used, like everyone uses it, and they are not afraid of talking their language.
But most of the people have now left Syria, and we don't know whether they'll have an opportunity to come back. You started a YouTube channel, and it's probably the very first YouTube channel that deals with the Dome language. How were the reactions to that? What sort of reactions and engagement did you get with that?
Yeah, so many people reacted with positive reaction. So they just support me and just tell me do more and do more beautiful things as you did. Like I just joined in a video, showed the similarity between Dom language and Sanskrit, and I made also another video in the I Love Languages channel. So many people liked it, and I just posted also songs in Dom language, and many people just like it and support me a lot, and they just want me to make more things.
Okay. So putting a language out there in public, and I think maybe that goes back to the question at the beginning about celebration. I've heard, especially from people who speak minority languages, so minority languages in the country in which they come from. So in Manchester, we had this with the Romani speaking community, the Tamazight speaking community, and others, that the opportunity to be out in the public space, whether it's the libraries or the museum or something else, and talk about and display their language through, whether it's poetry or artistic means, that puts their language on display and gives them some kind of recognition and feeling of pride and confidence. And perhaps that is one link between celebration and the advocacy and confidence and freedom, perhaps, role that we were searching for. Let's go back to Daniel first, and then Francesca. Coming back to the notion of diversity, some people have suggested that it's become a bit of a catchword. So institutions and corporations, maybe even cities, use it to market themselves, gain some kind of reputational capital. Everybody wants to be diverse. Is there a difference between diversity and multilingualism? I'm not talking about the semantics necessarily, but the context in which the terms are used, or the direction of engagement, and where do you see the direction of public engagement and social reform and social justice in the celebration component? Daniel first, please.
Yeah, I guess what comes to mind first is nothing to do specifically with the meaning of these two words, multilingualism or diversity, but rather just that I would say that there's kind of some dangers in the term diversity in general as a kind of, I think it's easier and easier to fall into a kind of cheerleading type of pattern around this word diversity, where you're boosting it in an abstract way, but maybe not really doing anything very concrete. And the two forces I think that push in that direction are social media on the one hand, which really rewards kinds of quick, shallow things. Not to say that everything there is quick and shallow, but that's what it rewards. I think that's clear. And on the other hand, I think there was an interest, at the start of the year of indigenous languages, there was an inherent interest on the part of governments who, in some ways, many of which I think see an easy way out in supporting their own minorities without actually making significant, without really significant support for autonomy, right? Because it's very easy to say, now we have an hour of classes in your language, and now we have some nice books and some nice this or that, without actually making any of the more vital concessions that cultures or societies need in order to protect their languages. Because the language endangerment is just a symptom of something else, right? It's never the root cause, right? It's a symptom of some lack of autonomy. So it gives an opportunity, I think, under the banner of diversity. It gives these larger players an opportunity to make these kinds of symbolic and maybe ultimately not so significant gestures, which can be harmful in certain cases, because putting the language in schools for an hour a week can really give a sense of complacency to a people, right? And say, well, now the language is in the school, now it's official, now it has respect that it never had before, so it's safe. When in fact, it's just the opposite. The children can't really learn anything within the course of an hour a week. And so, but if the parents think that now it's safe, then, you know, that they have to do less. You know, and on the side of the social media, I think that not at all to impute what's going on in social media, but I think that we have to really use social media and not be used by it. That is, if we're serious about promoting multilingualism, then we should have more serious real-life connections and in-person projects that are then can be promoted through social media, but not that social media should be an end in itself, right? To create, one can create a million memes and not really have any impact on the language whatsoever. But there is this rhetoric of, you know, now there's memes in the language and now it's being used on social media, but that can be, I think, quite deceptive.
So what about back to celebration? Is there a pathway from public celebrations to the actual protecting and safeguarding that you were talking about?
Sure, there's nothing wrong with celebration. Emma Goldman said, you know, it's not a revolution if you can't dance to it, or something like that. So yeah, that's totally fine, but it should be a celebration of something that's really happening. It shouldn't be a celebration as an end, you know, to itself. It has to be reflecting real work. Mm-hmm. That's all. Well, and the real work, I think, is supporting families. I mean, in the case of the urban cases that we're talking about, what we need is actual support for families raising their kids in different languages, not just to put them on the pedestal, but to see what we can do to help them.
Right. Okay, so maybe the celebration is a first step to even raise the awareness that among parents as well, to value languages, and then further steps should follow. I am shocked again and again when I hear from parents that they hear from practitioners, whether it's social workers or speech and language therapists or teachers, that they shouldn't actually speak their language to their children. And that is in a city, I've heard this so many times, in a place like Manchester, where we think, you know, research has established, as some people already mentioned, decades ago, that there's nothing wrong. On the contrary, it's an enrichment to speak several languages. Again, we have a public narrative, a city language narrative, which we've had now for a number of years, that takes pride in 200 languages or whatever the figure is. And yet the message still hasn't completely come across. Over to Francesca. I mean, you live in Ireland, which is a language that, a country that has been making huge efforts to have a language, you know, not to allow people to communicate because they can communicate in English. It has a huge symbolic value and is there to give people confidence in their history and heritage, right? Even if not everybody speaks it on the day-to-day basis. So what is the notion of diversity from your perspective, and what is multilingualism, and what's the direction of public engagement that can lead to some results?
I suppose I was thinking about the linguistic diversity and the word diversity aspect, and Definitely, we hear this a lot when it comes to, say, primary teachers saying, oh, I have a very diverse class or very linguistically diverse class. And often what they mean is that there are children who are second language learners. And what is behind or under the surface of that is, in that class, there are plenty of children who speak Irish or are learning Irish, pretty much everybody, right? So they're emergent bilinguals. There are children who speak a range of different languages at home, but maybe this never comes out in the conversations in the classroom. So to me, like, the society is multilingual for sure, and languages live side by side. And I see multilingual as being this, if you like, melting pot of languages. With diversity, I would see diversity as deeper, in the sense that it means that we can use different registers, that we can use different dialects, that we are at different stages in our journey of language development. So I think, especially because I work with children, I can see that in real terms in ever evolving lives of young children. And I think in Ireland, I've seen change, especially because I've lived there for the last about 20 years. So I have witnessed an evolution in the education policy, for example, in the language policy of the country. Now there are short language taste sessions that you can do in primary school, and schools are able to choose pretty much any language as long as they can find someone to teach it. And it doesn't matter if it's signed or spoken language. I think there's definitely, when we're talking about the advice given to parents, I hear more and more speech and language therapists well informed about the benefits of holding on to the mother tongue of the family. So I do see multilingualism as more and more perceived as being beneficial for most of the people I speak to would say it's great to hear a lot of different languages in Dublin if you're on the bus, if you're on public transport. I also, though, I've seen a very, very rapid shift in the last year since the Ukrainian crisis, in a positive way. I've seen a huge amount of really, really interesting initiatives that were just, in the space of 3 or 4 months, libraries, health centers, early childhood centers have come up with really creative ideas to welcome not only the culture of Ukraine, but also the language. So now I just heard yesterday there is a movie night for children in the library. There was never a movie night because the library is closed. So a lot of really interesting collaborative projects are coming up. And what I am also seeing is that people have not stopped to say, now we have a challenge that we want to deal with, which is newcomers with a new language. They are extending their projects to other languages. So in a way, what is needed in terms of public reform, social reform, is, I hope it's not a crisis again. It's just stretching the imagination and seeing how beneficial a small pilot project might be and how it can be extended to be the norm, how it can be extended to be normal social policy.
And thank you. That's a very interesting observation also on the Ukrainian refugees. I've also noticed that in several cities in Europe that signs are being put up in Ukrainian. And they're usually not, I mean, those that I've seen are not just functional, they are celebratory, they are sending out a message, they're a gesture. That in itself, though, is an interesting test case because many of Ukrainian, of course, is the national language in Ukraine. In fact, now, and that's also a matter of dispute, above Russian or instead of Russian, where Russian is spoken by large parts of the population, and many of the people who are refugees and coming to Western Europe from Ukraine as Ukrainian refugees are Russian speakers. Do we see Russian also embedded into that welcoming gesture to the Russian speakers who happen to be refugees from Ukraine? Or is there some kind of association that, the only way to do that is to actually embrace the declared national language. I think that I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's an interesting, that's an interesting test case as well, which brings me back to this idea of diversity and multilingualism. And thank you for your thoughts on that. I don't think it's a question that's immediately resolvable, but I think we've heard several different positions or associations with those terms, and what I've kind of read occasionally, there's different views. I mean, some people say, as you did, Francesca, diversity very much allows us to look not just as what we regard as separate languages, but also different modes of communicating within a language. And so that is even more inclusive. Whereas multilingualism, some people have said, well, that's just about counting languages. But there is also the opposite view that says diversity is actually accepting the hierarchies, accepting that some languages should be more powerful than others, and we just have many of them. Whereas multilingualism is the active engagement with different forms of language. So it can mean different things to different people. We'll come to the final or pre-final round of statements from the panelists in a moment. We may have a few minutes left for questions. And so if you'd like to type in a question in the chat, I'll try to keep an eye on it, and hopefully Kesra will also help me. We may, if we have time, and no promises, but if we have time, we'll feed at least a couple of questions back to the panelists. The final question that I have to all of you is, this day is called International Mother Language Day. Back in 2018, which was our second Language Day celebrations in Manchester, that I helped lead back then, I suggested that we should call it International Mother and Father Language Day. That was taken up at the time, and I don't know if there's still any kind of internet traces of that, but at the time, Manchester Libraries did actually call it officially International Mother and Father Language Day. The purpose was threefold. I mean, first, it was something to have something unique for Manchester. We're doing Language Day along with the rest of the world, but we've got our unique touch. But it was also to point out that there are fathers who pass on their language to their children, as well as mothers who pass on their language. I mean, some children grow up with a father language and a mother language, and perhaps other languages. And also this kind of automatic association, and I understand mother language it's a phrase, it's a collocation, but still, it does give us that association with, the mothers are the ones who bring up the children, and the fathers not. It has this kind of perpetuation of gender roles. And I thought that, bringing in the fathers into the title might also get us to reflect a little bit about that. And I have to say, in subsequent years, as you might have seen from the publications now for promotion for this day in Manchester, the fathers have been removed again. And it was quite strange. A couple of years ago, I actually faced some very, very active resistance. I made the proposal again, and some people were very much against it. But never mind, it's not really about the mothers or the fathers. I just wanted to kind of add that historical anecdote. In linguistics now, in social linguistics, in the academic discussions in the field, there is a lot of critical reflection on this very notion of mother tongue or native language or first language. In a world where people are mobile, people are multilingual, people move from the places that they grew up in. Sometimes the language that was their only language that they spoke in the early years, it has suffered some kind of attrition. They may speak a different language better now than they spoke in childhood. So native language is a bit of an essentializing concept. It's as if there's it's like DNA. Language is not DNA. Language permeates, language changes. You can have several of them, as we've been saying. So I wonder if I can kind of feed that back to you and ask you to comment. Kamal first, perhaps. So what's your association with the term mother tongue or native language or first language? Not so much about what terms should be used, but what is your feeling? I mean, do you kind of intuitively have a language that you would consider to be your first language, or your native language, and the others are secondary? Or how does that work for you? And I mean, you said before that you use different languages for different purposes. Is there a bit of a hierarchy in your language repertoire? Come on.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I think I can consider one of them as my mother tongue, our native language or first language, which is, I consider the Dom language as my mother language because it is the language which I use to communicate with my family, relatives, and community. So yeah, so it will be strange, like in my country, to call Arabic as my mother language, because I belong to an ethnic group who talk a different language from Arabic, so it will be confusing them if I say Arabic also is my mother language, because I also learned Arabic from the beginning when I was born until now. So I spoke Arabic at the same time as when I spoke Dom language. So I can consider both of them as my first languages, but I consider the Dom language more because it is the language which I use with my family and community and all. Yeah, so
yeah.
And when I moved to Sweden, when I was 14, we moved to Sweden, and I had to use Swedish language outside of my home and everywhere else at schools. And so sometimes it just feels like I know Swedish, I'm good in Swedish, but also I can't consider it as my first language or mother language, because I'm from that ethnic group, the Dom ethnic group, so it makes the language Dom as my mother language, because I use it at home and with all people who speak the Dom. They belong also to the same community, ethnic group, so it feels just like that.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have several different dimensions there, don't we? One is sequence. So which language was first? And I mean, that's a fact, that's a historical fact, but even that is not straightforward, because you said you grew up with two languages already, so two first languages. And the other one seems to be ancestry, but also belonging. Belonging is a very subjective thing. It can change over time, but the family plays a very important role there, as you said. Anjum, you told us about your socialization in different countries and with different languages. Is there a first language, a mother tongue, a native language? Do these concepts make sense to you at all?
No, they don't make sense to me. Mother tongue has never made sense to me. I'm like Kamal, and I'm sure there's millions of us around the world, and we speak several languages as our first languages. I could be wrong, but I think mother tongue has been invented by a monolingual person or culture, because people who only speak one language can't imagine that you can be speaking several languages. So I don't think we need mother or father or first languages, because there are more of us who speak more than one language from the moment we start speaking. So I think it's again a monocultural society imposing their non-understanding of being multicultural, multilingual, multifaceted. And I think it's a really good point you bring up, because who can, I know that Bangladesh maybe called it, but I'm not clear. I can't be sure about that. But I would say that it's, I spoke Arabic, English, and Urdu. Maybe, I don't know. And I write drama, and I study people all the time. And I think sometimes, like when we're under stress, or we need to speak of love when we're feeling emotional, it's like, and you express yourself in one language or another, or if you get angry and you lose it. And so I have to make sense of it in drama. And so sometimes, which language do you express your anger in, or which language is it you dream in, for example?
Yeah.
Because, sometimes you think and dream in one language and speak another? And so it's a really interesting question, which would be amazing to have a good, big, long discussion about and come up with a term which sits well with people like me who are multilingual. Because I've never been happy, and I think I've kind of made it clear here and over the years. Why mother tongue? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, both of you, these are so complementary perspectives, and they fit in so nicely into a whole, and we're only halfway through the panel on this particular question. I was actually invited yesterday to give an interview to a visual anthropologist about what languages I dream in. And I said what I've always said when I was asked that question: it depends who I'm dreaming about and what language they spoke to me in real life. And if that comes up in the dream, then that language comes up in the dream as well. But I think there's among the many important points, Anjum, that you just made was one about this monolingual mindset that governs so much. And maybe, and if I kind of try to keep coming back to my initial opening question, why do we celebrate, and where does that lead us, and how does the celebration tie in with the fight for freedom and human rights and the advocacy that many of you have addressed already, and the protection that we have in the title of today's event, then changing mindsets might be a key to things. I a few years ago campaigned to change the census question on languages in England and Wales. The question was is your main language? And it was introduced 10 years ago in the census for the first time. And when I filled in the census back then, I wasn't prepared of it, and I wasn't prepared for it, and it didn't make sense to me because I didn't know what my main language was. Is it the one that I speak most hours of the day, or the one that I have the emotional attachment with family, and on and on. And then we campaigned for a few years, and by the way, not all academics were for the campaign. Some academics who work on language said you shouldn't campaign, you should wait for the civil servants to come and address you and your expertise and not antagonize the officials. So there were very, very different views about and this issue of advocacy and how we bring in academic knowledge into the advocacy. It wasn't straightforward. We failed. We did not, those of us who did campaign, we did not succeed. The same question came up again. However, there was a guideline added. And it said the language that you feel most comfortable with, which also, you know, it depends, you know, comfortable with whom and comfortable where. Daniel, what are your thoughts about native language, first language, and so on?
I can just point out a kind of paradox with this mother tongue, the term mother tongue concept of it, which is that there was a big push for mother tongue education in many parts of the world. And a lot of that was based on studies that showed that children learn better, quicker in their mother tongue. And so in places like the Philippines and Thailand and elsewhere, there was a kind of, there were experiments, the Lebuagan experiment in the Philippines, which also showed that in that context. But on the other side, we have many cases of language reclamation and revitalization where families are deliberately raising children in languages that are not their mother tongue and languages that haven't been spoken in sometimes 100 years. And we want to support that as well, right? So there's this, and for them, they may call that their mother tongue, even though it wasn't, it was maybe the language of their great-grandparents. So there's a tricky question of mother tongue, I think, when it comes to education, which is on one side, we want to support it, mother tongue education for all of the scientific studies that have shown that children benefit from it. On the other side, we certainly want to support these language revitalization projects on the family level, which have been very impressive. And I don't think anybody's shown that children suffer intellectually or otherwise in those contexts, right? So yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think maybe the key there is that it's a language that you are intentionally connected to or connecting yourself to, and that maybe becomes the best language of instruction, right? But there should be a way to connect these two concepts, I think, and that has some policy implication as well, maybe.
So, Francesca, in Ireland, there's a national language that is not. I don't want to kind of go around in the circularity and draw back on the very concepts that we're critiquing. But there is a language that is a national language that not everybody, or maybe few people, speak in the home naturally before they go to school. So, what are your thoughts in that particular context of Ireland, as well as globally, on these notions?
I agree with what Daniel was just saying a second ago, in that a lot of people that I speak to in the Irish language world would say, well, the organization you run is called Mother Tongue, but Irish is not my mother tongue. But what about me? Where am I in this? So besides the terminology, I think also in the research, we often might end up saying to parents, or in the advice, we might say to parents, well, you should speak the language you know best, or the language that you feel most comfortable in, because through that language, you can pass on a richer input. But it cannot be the same rule or the same advice for an endangered language, because if you wait for people to feel that they're perfect speakers, then languages will die very, very quickly. So I think in the Irish language context, it's really important. And I've seen people are really reconnecting with the language on an emotional level, on an identity level. Obviously, it's taught in schools, so there's also positive and negative emotions associated with that. But I think this aspect of seeing the language as enriching your national identity, your land. For a lot of people, the Irish language is very much linked to the land, to there are a lot of beautiful words associated with farming and with the weather. So I think it is important to bear in mind that that is the native language. And I would like to add also that when I visit classes with, like, say, even junior, senior infants, so 6, 7-year-olds, even younger, and I ask children, okay, what are the languages that you've heard of, like the names of the languages, and then what are the languages in this class, and so on. Whenever there's a child who doesn't have a mother tongue that they consider to be something other than English, they immediately jump to Irish and they say, I have Irish. So something that maybe they haven't fully thought of. So they may think, oh, I only speak English. So many Irish people say, I only speak English, and it's not true. They also speak Irish, but they don't feel they speak it well enough. And it was similarly in my early childhood. I was exposed to an Italian dialect, but nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever told me that I knew Italian and something else. I was like, you're Italian, you only speak Italian. So I do believe that there's a policy side and there's a technical side, but there's also an emotional side that we can harness to rekindle some connections with languages that are in danger.
So wonderful. So again, thank you. I mean, that's where celebration again comes in, again and again. So we're talking about changing attitudes, changing mindsets, but also raising awareness. People are, you mentioned growing up with several different languages, are not actually aware, not naming them, or also not recognizing them. And that's where celebratory activity can help. And of course, we can go around and think about the appropriateness of the term mother tongue, mother language. Does it capture everything? That doesn't, of course, take anything away from the wonderful work that Mother Tongues Ireland is doing in the plurality. I think that the name also so much signifies the plurality of it. And that's a very, very elegant solution. It's not the mother tongue, it's the mother tongues in the plural. Thank you all very, very much for your contributions. I think it's been a wonderful discussion. This is being recorded and will be at some point on the MACFEST, so the Muslim Arts and Culture Festival's YouTube channel, with a link from the City of Languages website. Please do have a look at our City of Languages social media, the Twitter account, and the website. Follow us, look out for events and news. We have two particular initiatives that I'd like to point out. At the very beginning of this event, I mentioned the strategic vision to link Manchester with other multilingual cities. We're doing that through this panel and other work that we're doing together with some of the panelists as well, but also through the call for a multilingual cities movement. That call was initiated some years ago. It already has quite a number of signatories and people interested. You'll find the call, the wording of the call on the City of Languages website. It's there to be disseminated, if necessary, to be molded. It's a suggestion, but we hope that it'll inspire. There's in fact different versions of the text accessible to different audiences. There is also for Manchester a city language strategy, a draft which has been around for a number of years, which I co-authored with two colleagues a few years ago. Manchester has taken a little bit of action on that. At some point there was a report on language diversity by the City Council. I personally very much hope that the language strategy will be pursued further. COVID has come in between and interrupted all sorts of things, among other things. But I hope that the draft language strategy that we wrote can also be a model for other cities to look at, to take things, and that we can enter into that international discussion and see, what can cities actually do beyond celebration in practical terms? What do you do, as you do in your organizations and your day-to-day work, in between International Mother Language Days? What can the city do and what can institutions do? I think that would be the pathway from celebration to the concrete action that defend equality, defend freedom, defend human rights, defend people's dignities, and help us amend that monolingual mindset and bring it down to the multilingual reality that we all experience. Thanks again to everybody for joining us. Thanks again to the wonderful team by MACFEST who have helped us with the logistics and made it possible for us to get together. And we'll definitely see you next year, but I very much hope we'll see you in between. Just a final word, the City of Languages website also has a contact us template, and we'd love to hear your comments about today's event, about general things. Get in touch and we see if we can do something together in the future. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
A good day, depending on where in the world you are.
Thank you. Bye.